So my reflections on leadership during the pandemic. For me, there's a famous saying that JFK had apparently when he visited NASA way back in 1967, I think, or somewhere along those lines, where he met one of the janitors. And when he met one of the janitors, as I'm sure you'll know because it's very common, he asked, "Oh, well, what's your role?" And the janitor replied, I'm paraphrasing, saying, "I'm putting a man on the moon." My reflections in terms of leadership during this pandemic is that absolutely I lead a business that wholly and solely has that application. What I mean by that is absolutely our clinical colleagues are front and centre and an astonishing job, but equally alongside them, behind them, there is an equally dedicated, resilient and courageous workforce that if they didn't do their job, and I'll talk about some of the highlights in a minute, we just would not have been able to respond and react in the way that we did. And my reflection on leadership is around how we achieved those achievements, but equally the value that people add in this organisation during that. And that's the context of which I was able to lead this business, is we have a fundamental role in the delivery and response to the pandemic. So if I think about the achievements that we've done, there is literally a long list of great things that I am personally very proud of. I couldn't be prouder of the teams that I have had the pleasure to work alongside and of course lead, but everyone has been part of that response. If I think about the PPE supply, for example, our frontline clinicians and the supporting staff needed the right equipment, and for a number of reasons which will be debated and are known, we didn't have the right equipment to deal with that level of response. A lot of NHS organisations got into a really difficult situation where they weren't able to source that. Our trust didn't have that situation, and the team worked tirelessly to make sure that did not happen once. In fact, we had very good PPE supply. Behind that, there was a lot of hard work and a lot of close calls, some hairy moments where we nearly didn't. But through that, we managed to achieve frontline provision of PPE throughout this pandemic with not a single drop in making sure that our staff feel supported in delivering that care. I'm incredibly proud of that, particularly when I look at some of the situations other organisations got themselves into. I'm incredibly proud. If I think about the O2 infrastructure and the response that all our colleagues made to make sure that A, we identified the problem, B, we engaged all our clinical colleagues around the decision making involved in that and how we needed to, as a team, come together, discuss the issues, respond and then manage that implementation. It's fantastic. I think we all saw the headlines of hospital trust running out of oxygen. We never got there. We were way on the front foot. We were 4 to 5 weeks ahead of that, and that's the expertise behind it, and then the engagement of that, not done in a silo, that allows us to be so effective in our response. If I think about that wider estates bit, you've got the medical engineering team that worked tirelessly with our ITU colleagues to make sure that they knew how to split the ventilator or which bits of tubing fitted on the right ones. Again, making sure that the expertise was aligned to the clinical colleagues to make sure that the patient care was never interrupted and that there was good communication in that. It makes me really proud. I think of the estates team and the way that they were responsive. In fact, all of them, the estates team, the portering, the domestics, the catering, all the way that they responded to the need of the trust, our clinical colleagues, our patients that we were receiving. Some very difficult times. We had to make decisions that weren't easy to make, but we responded, we rolled up the sleeves, we stood side by side with the colleagues, and it makes me really proud. If I think of the A&E facility that we built, we were the first in the northeast to build, in 3 months, we built a new A&E wing while maintaining A&E provision during a COVID surge. I mean, these are not activities that are done without the dedication, the resilience and the courage of the staff that that I represent as the managing director of the business. If I think through the commercial team, as most people will know, not only do we deliver, if you like, the estates and facilities services to the trust and procurement, but we also have a commercial remit to grow that service and to bring additional income in to the trust that we can invest it back into frontline care. And at the beginning of the year, when COVID hit, all those plans were shelved, and we'd have had every single legitimacy to say, actually, we've got to focus on just doing that, and all our plans are now shelved. That would have stacked up, and a lot of subsidiary businesses in the NHS did do that, but we didn't. We managed to exceed our targets that we'd set. We designed reusable PPE and supplied it into our colleagues in the NHS, so we knew that they would have not only high quality equipment, but also were keeping the money in the NHS, and we all know what was happening with PPE contracts at that stage. Well, we kept ourselves above that. We developed an environmentally friendly solution to that issue. Not only did we do that, we set up an NHS deep cleaning and advisory service, a national brand to help improve the standards of cleaning in the whole of the country. And we're still going on that journey, working with some of the biggest educational academy trusts in the northeast in terms of improving the cleanliness of those environments and the standards that are associated to it. That is a responsive business. That is a business that's effective during a pandemic. If I think through the reasons why we're effective, and my reflections on leadership during that time, I think fundamentally you've got to have efficient communications. You've got to have your confidence in decision making. You've got to see the value that your workforce and your people represent and have to offer. And you've got to think about the sustainability, the pace of things, if I think about that from a leadership perspective. If I think about efficient communication, I'm a firm believer, and if I think through to how we improve the oxygen infrastructure, I believe having the right people in the room and not the hierarchy necessarily in the room is the right way forward in the context of this situation, where you need to make informed decisions, but you don't have all the information to the best of your knowledge. So, for example, I could sit in the meeting and try and relay it, as I'm sure colleagues like Deepak and things could, for the hierarchy side of it. But what made us really effective was we had the people who knew the knowledge and the detail to inform the clinical colleagues. The trust colleagues had the foresight to bring the right clinical people and operational people into the room. We had a discussion, we agreed the plan with no chain of command, upward, outward, having to promote it. That for me was a good example of efficient communication. And sat alongside that, certainly from my perspective when I was communicating with our staff, apart from obviously having visibility, which is fundamental, of course, in these scenarios, but you have to be open and honest about those, with those communications. You won't always get it right. We're all vulnerable. This pandemic impacted everybody at all, kind of fundamental levels. It affected us in our personal lives, it affected us in our wider social lives, it affected us in our work lives. All of those in different ways over a long period of time were affected. So different in nature for each of us, but similar as well in the concept of the themes of which we're all affected by. And we need to communicate about that, we need to talk about it, and we need to be honest. And I believe actually sharing each other's vulnerability around that is essential during the pandemic. And again, what made us effective within our organisation and the trust. And that's another thing that I reflect upon, of which I'm really proud about as well. If I think about confidence in decision making, I touched on it just before. A pandemic situation or a crisis situation, I don't really want to use crisis because crisis tends to be short term, whereas obviously this situation is very much long term. Very often you have to make decisions quickly and you won't have all the information as you would like to do. You can't particularly go through the normal governance process, but you have to make those decisions. And if you don't have all the information, it can be challenging to do so. And you've got to have the confidence to make that decision as a leader. And I think we did that very well. And I think you can do that very well if you rely on your intrinsic values in terms of making the right decision on what you feel is the right thing to do for the interests of staff, of patients, and the principles of the organisation, and owning the outcome of that. So every decision that I made, right or wrong, I did my best to make that decision in there, and I know my colleagues did, and we all had the same values underpinning those to make that decision. And I own each and every one of those, and I'll stand by it at any time. And I think that allows you to make decisions in a difficult situation without all the information and do them confidently and to stand by them because you believe in the values and the organisation, the people of what you're trying to do. And being able to ratify that within your mind quickly is a key skill, I think, that's effective during that type of situation. I think the other really kind of fundamental piece to this is that we're nothing without each other. Everyone that works in this organisation has an expertise and a knowledge and an insight and a view, and I recognise that, and I'm just so grateful for the value that this organisation has. If I think about the knowledge around the oxygen infrastructure, I think about the knowledge around PPE, the passion, the commitment, how to get the best out of these situations. Our workforce have that. If you think about the accountability piece, it's really important to delegate that accountability, knowing the value that person has and allowing the freedom to go and operate within that and make the right decisions based on the knowledge and skill sets they've got. And recognising that value is fundamentally important to making sure that they feel engaged in the business, feel part of something, and that their insight, knowledge and experience is valued. I think the other bit that's, I'm not going to say I kind of picked up on, I think Deepak recognised this very early on, Deepak, medical director, as you all know, pace of this. Especially at the start, it was kind of, if you like, a sprint straight away. It was unique, it was scary, we were all working together. But it was a long game, it wasn't a short game, and you have to manage burnout. Because of the commitment and the passion, everyone can work all the hours, 24/7 literally, you could have easily worked. And it was good advice given to me to make sure that you manage that tempo during something like this, which is absolutely a marathon and not a sprint. And although, incredibly hard for a lot of colleagues that were working long hours in heavy PPE with very emotional situations. But I think doing the best that you can to manage that pace is fundamental. And sat parallel to that is to be kind to each other during that period. It's hard enough just doing the job. And I think it's our ability to recognise the value of each other and be kind to each other during that made us so effective in the delivery of our response to the pandemic, which of course is ongoing, but we have done very well, I think. Sure, there's things we will have got wrong, and with hindsight we could have probably made them better decisions, but in the main, I think based on the concepts we've talked about, or I've talked about, they're my main reflections from the pandemic, and I'm very proud of how we have responded